Claude Code can save you hours of work, but only if you use it the right way. Most people open it, type a vague request, and then get frustrated when it edits the wrong files, misses important context, or gives outdated code. The problem is not always Claude itself. The problem is usually the workflow. To use Claude Code like a pro, you need to set clear instructions, give it the right project context, use planning before coding, create reusable commands, connect fresh documentation, and review everything before shipping. In this video, you will learn how to turn Claude Code from a basic coding assistant into a practical workflow that actually helps you build faster, fix bugs smarter, and avoid common mistakes. Number 1. Set the right goal. Using Claude Code like a pro does not mean asking it to build an entire app from one vague sentence and hoping the result works. The real goal is to turn Claude Code into a controlled coding assistant that understands your project, follows your rules, uses the right tools, checks its own work, and saves you time without creating hidden problems. Most people struggle because they treat Claude Code like a normal chatbot. They paste a big request, wait for code, and then get frustrated when the result is incomplete, outdated, or hard to trust. Claude Code works best when the task is clear, the project context is available, and the workflow is broken into steps. Before you start, open the correct project folder, make sure your dependencies are installed, check that the app can run locally, and make sure your Git status is clean. This gives you a safe starting point. If Claude changes files and something breaks, you can compare the difference and roll back if needed. A good first message should explain the goal, the stack, the exact problem, the files involved if you know them, and what success looks like. Instead of saying, build authentication, say, inspect the existing authentication flow, explain how it works, then propose the smallest safe change needed to add password reset. That single difference gives Claude a real direction. Number 2. Create project memory. One of the biggest mistakes beginners make is repeating the same instructions in every session. Claude Code can remember project rules through files like CLAUDE.md, and those rules become part of the working context. This is where you put information that should always matter in this project. For example, tell it which package manager to use, which test command to run, how your folders are organized, what coding style you follow, what files should not be touched, and which environment variables must never be printed or edited. Keep this file short and practical. Do not turn it into a long documentation dump. A clean memory file might say, use pnpm, run type checks before finishing, never modify production environment files, keep API handlers thin, put database logic in the service layer, and ask before changing migrations. If the project has different rules in different folders, use folder-level memory carefully. The problem happens when memory files conflict. One file says use npm, another says use pnpm, and Claude has to guess. When Claude ignores a rule, do not assume it is broken. Check whether the memory file is actually loaded, whether the instruction is specific enough, and whether another instruction is fighting against it. Memory is not a guarantee. It is guidance. For rules that must always happen, like blocking edits to secret files, use stronger guardrails instead of only writing a reminder. Number 3. Use planning first. The fastest way to waste time with Claude Code is letting it write code before it understands the job. For anything bigger than a tiny fix, start with planning. Ask Claude to inspect the project, identify the relevant files, explain the current behavior, and create a step-by-step plan before making changes. Tell it not to edit files yet. This matters because many coding mistakes happen before the first line of code is written. The assistant may choose the wrong architecture, update the wrong layer, or solve a symptom instead of the real bug. Planning forces it to slow down and show its reasoning in a useful way. A strong planning prompt sounds like this. Review the current implementation, ask clarifying questions if anything is unclear, then propose a minimal plan with risks, files to change, tests to run, and rollback steps. After you read the plan, correct it before giving permission to code. If the plan is too broad, narrow it. If it wants to rewrite half the app for a small issue, tell it to make the smallest possible change. This is how you stay in control. Claude Code is powerful, but it still needs direction. The more expensive the change, the more important planning becomes. Number 4. Prompt with constraints. A professional Claude Code prompt has 4 parts: the goal, the context, the constraints, and the definition of done. The goal says what you want. The context says what Claude needs to know. The constraints say what it must avoid. The definition of done says how it should prove the work is complete. For example, do not just say, fix the checkout bug. Say, users get an error when submitting checkout with a saved card. Reproduce the issue first. Inspect the payment and order creation flow. Do not change the database schema unless you ask first. Keep the existing user interface unchanged. Then run the relevant tests and explain the final diff. That kind of prompt prevents random changes. It also makes the answer easier to review. When the task is vague in your own mind, use Claude to clarify it before coding. Ask it to interview you with questions. This is especially useful for new features. If you cannot describe the behavior, edge cases, and acceptance criteria, the assistant cannot guess them correctly. Bad prompts create bad code. Clear prompts create a controlled workflow. Treat Claude Code like a junior developer with amazing speed. It can do a lot, but it needs a ticket that actually explains the work. Number 5. Build custom commands. If you type the same prompt again and again, turn it into a custom command. This is one of the easiest ways to become faster. Custom commands are reusable workflows saved as markdown files in the commands folder inside your .claude folder. They can handle repeated tasks like creating a new API endpoint, writing tests for a file, fixing lint errors, reviewing a pull request, generating documentation, or checking a feature before release. A good command is not just a short instruction. It should include the steps Claude must follow, the checks it must run, and the output format you want back. You can also make commands flexible by passing arguments like a file name, feature name, or ticket number. Start small. Do not create 20 commands on day 1. Notice what you repeat naturally, then save those workflows one by one. For example, if you constantly ask Claude to run the TypeScript check, fix errors, and summarize what changed, make that a command. If you always ask it to create API routes with validation, error handling, and types, make that a command too. The goal is not to collect fancy commands. The goal is to remove repeated thinking from your day while keeping quality consistent. Number 6. Use fresh documentation. Claude can write code quickly, but it can still use outdated patterns if the library has changed. This is a common reason people think the model is dumb. The real issue is that the task depends on current documentation. Frameworks, payment tools, databases, and deployment platforms change often. When you are working with a library that moves fast, do not let Claude guess. Connect it to current documentation through trusted tools. MCP servers are useful here because they connect Claude Code to external systems and services. A documentation MCP server, such as Context 7, can help Claude pull version-specific docs instead of relying only on memory. This is useful when working with tools like React frameworks, Supabase, Stripe, Versal, or other services where old examples can break. But MCP is not magic. Only connect servers you trust, review what permissions they need, and avoid giving access to sensitive production systems unless you fully understand the risk. For a beginner, start with documentation tools before connecting databases or payment accounts. Once you are comfortable, you can use MCP for more advanced tasks, like reading database schemas, checking browser console errors, or inspecting a local web app. The rule is simple. If Claude needs fresh outside information, give it a safe way to get that information. Number 7. Delegate with subagents. Subagents are useful because they can handle focused work in their own isolated context and then report back to the main session. This helps keep the main conversation cleaner. The mistake many people make is creating subagents as fake job titles. They make one agent a product manager, another a designer, another a senior engineer, and expect them to behave like a real team. That often creates vague output. A better approach is to define subagents by task, not by role. Create a code review agent that only reads files and suggests improvements. Create a test investigator that looks for missing test cases. Create a documentation agent that explains how a module works. Create a user interface review agent that checks layout, accessibility, and confusing flows through a browser tool. Each agent should have a narrow job, clear permissions, and a clear output format. Do not give every subagent every tool. If an agent only needs to read code, make it read only. If it needs browser inspection, give it browser tools but not database permissions. This reduces risk and keeps the output focused. Use subagents when the task would pollute the main context, when you need a second opinion, or when several small checks can happen separately before the final implementation. Number 8. Test the work. Claude Code should not just write code and say it is done. A professional workflow makes it prove the result. Before editing, ask it to reproduce the bug or explain the current behavior. After editing, ask it to run the smallest relevant checks first, then broader checks if needed. This might include unit tests, type checks, linting, build commands, or a local browser test. If a test fails, do not immediately ask for another full rewrite. Ask Claude to read the error, identify the cause, and fix only the broken part. When working on a front-end issue, browser tools can be very helpful. A Playwright or Chrome DevTools connection can let Claude inspect the page, read console errors, check the document structure, and verify that the interface actually behaves correctly. This is much better than trusting code that looks right but was never opened in a browser. For database or payment work, be extra careful. Use local or test environments. Never let Claude experiment directly on production data. A good final response from Claude should include what changed, why it changed, which files were edited, which checks passed, which checks could not be run, and what you should manually verify. Number 9. Use plugins carefully. Plugins can save a lot of setup time because they bundle useful pieces together. A plugin can include commands, skills, subagents, hooks, MCP servers, and other workflow tools. This is powerful because you can reuse the same setup across projects or share it with a team. But it also creates a risk. Installing a plugin without reading it is like giving a stranger instructions for how your coding assistant should behave. Before using one, check what it adds, what tools it can call, what commands it creates, and whether it changes permissions. Add only what you need. Too many extensions can make Claude slower, noisier, and less reliable because every extra instruction competes for attention. A strong setup is usually simple. Use memory for always-on project rules. Use commands for repeated workflows. Use MCP when Claude needs outside tools or fresh docs. Use subagents for isolated checks. Use hooks when something must happen every time, like running a formatter after edits or blocking dangerous file changes. Do not install a giant workflow just because it looks advanced. The best Claude Code setup is the one you actually understand and can debug when something goes wrong. Number 10. Review before shipping. The most important rule is simple. Claude can generate code, but you own the code. Never push changes just because the assistant says they work. Review the diff yourself. Look for unexpected files, large rewrites, changed environment files, new dependencies, weak error handling, missing validation, and security problems. If the change touches authentication, payments, permissions, database migrations, file uploads, or user data, slow down and review more carefully. Start a fresh Claude Code session and ask it to review only the files that were changed. This gives you a cleaner second pass without the same context bias. Ask it to look for security issues, performance problems, edge cases, and tests that should be added. Then run the project yourself. Click through the feature. Check the logs. Confirm that the original bug is fixed and that nothing nearby broke. Be careful with permission modes. Approving every action blindly is risky, and skipping permissions completely can be dangerous outside an isolated environment. If you use auto-approval features, Still keep important projects protected with Git, backups, test data, and clear allow and deny rules. Claude Code is strongest when it is fast but supervised. The professional workflow is not trust everything. The professional workflow is guide, constrain, test, review, and only then ship.